Thank you for joining us on Bees on the Law, legal talk from the boss perspective. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide legal advice and is not meant to create an attorney-client relationship. Also remember, laws change and differ from state to state, so this is not a substitute for seeking legal advice in your jurisdiction on the current law applicable to you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bees on the Law. I'm Susan Dawson, Illinois, Wisconsin bee, and I'm here with Camille, our California bee. And we thought we would just do kind of a quick high-level primer on wage statements. May not seem like the most, crazy fun topic, but it is actually very important, and different states have different rules. And so if you have employees in different states, you need to be aware of what's required to be on a pay stub. And you should also, even if you don't have the requirement, sometimes make sure that there's details on the pay stub. It's important to, itemize what you're paying out. So the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is the federal act, does not require employers to provide itemized wage statements. Usually this is a state law type thing, and states are all across the board. So let's start with, the fun favorite state, California. Camille, tell us what's going on in California.
Well, in California, every time you're paid, if you're an hourly employee, there are some differences. For example, if you do piece rate work, things like that. But for the most part, most employees are going to fall under Labor Code Section 226, which requires you to have 9 different things on a wage statement. And whether you pay your employer by cash or personal check, they're required to have a separate writing showing all of these 9 things. And so I will start with the first 4, and then we're going to take a break from California. We'll talk about the others later.
Okay.
But you've got to have the gross rate wages earned, which I know seems ridiculous, but if you earn $1,000 before anything comes out, you got to have that number on the check. The total hours worked. This isn't required for exempt employees, but hourly employees, you got to have the hours worked. If the employee is paid on piece rate, you got to have the number of pieces, and all deductions have to be shown. Now, for example, if you have an employee who has several wage garnishments, those can typically all be lumped as one item, but all the other deductions have to be listed separately. And now let's take a break from California, because that's a lot, and let's talk a bit about Illinois.
Sure, Illinois, and I'll touch briefly on Wisconsin. So Illinois and Wisconsin have somewhat different, but are a bit on the same page. This is one area where we're not, I don't think, over the top, though there's plenty of states that have no rules regarding this, but they're required. It's required to have a pay stub or a wage statement every pay period. So if you're getting paid, that's got to be accompanied by a written document. They don't say how that needs to be delivered to you, but it's got to be in writing, and it's got to talk about what deductions were made, hours worked, what was the rate, gross wages, just, your common items that you would expect to be on a wage statement. The one thing that I find interesting is that Wisconsin, very similar. Wisconsin wants, every the statement with every paycheck, and clear deductions, hours worked, and all of that. But one thing that Wisconsin actually goes further and says that if you're doing this electronically, then it's only allowed if an employee has access to a no-cost printer. So you can't require. Isn't that interesting? You have to allow them to print them out somewhere. So I found that a little interesting. Wisconsin coming in there with a little twist at the end. We don't usually expect that from Wisconsin, but anyway, so that's, the Midwest, or Illinois and Wisconsin. Other states in the Midwest, like Ohio, don't have significant rules regarding wage statements. So we'll throw it back to California then. You want to tell us more about California?
Keep going. Sure. So obviously we stopped with the deductions. And so after the deductions, you have to have the net of all the wages earned after the deductions. It has to have the inclusive dates that you're paying the employee. So if you pay them from the 1st to the 15th, you've got to have that. If you pay them weekly, you have to have the first date of pay and the last date of pay that the paycheck is for. The name of the employee and the last 4 digits of their social security number. You put the whole social security number on there, you're in violation.
Oh, yes.
Last 4 digits. Probably the biggest thing is the name and address of the legal entity that's the employer. You know, a lot of businesses, especially as they grow, they may have a separate company that does the payroll.
Mm-hmm.
So whoever's paying them, the name of that entity has to be on the check along with the address. And one of the things that I think is probably the most significant is you have to have all applicable hourly rates. So if you have an employee who earns $20 for regular time and they work overtime, you have to have the hours that they worked regular time with the $20 and then the hours that they worked overtime. So they work 5 hours overtime, and let's say they get time and a half or $30, you have to have that $30 amount on the check as well, and any other applicable amounts. And I think that is where a lot of employers mess up.
Not having all that granular detail.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. I think if you have employees in California and you're doing it right and you're familiar with it, you're probably likely to be compliant in most states. But then if you're in a state like I said earlier, Ohio, that doesn't have a lot of rules, or I find it interesting when I was researching, getting ready for this podcast, that Delaware only has rules for employers of 4 or more employees, right? So if you're if you're really, really small in Delaware, you might not, and then you hire someone up in, obviously if you hired someone in California, most employers are aware they need to check into it. Let's say you hired someone in Illinois or Wisconsin and that requires it for everyone. You might not know that. So, you know, I think that what's really interesting is just how different these rules are. And it goes beyond that, though, because I think that while California might go to the extreme, having more detail on a pay stub can be helpful in an audit situation.
I agree.
You can actually then say, look, this is what's going on. This is how people are paid. You know, there's no question about, oh, well, our pay stub doesn't call out, you know, I pay a person by like project, by visit, by appointment. And so I just put in 1 hour, but it probably only took them 15 minutes. Well, okay, if it took them 15 minutes and they did a number of those, more than 40, it looks like they needed to be paid overtime. And so being more detailed and having that information can actually be very helpful in an audit situation.
Yeah, and in California, there are penalties associated with not having all of these items on, you know, the paycheck, which I think, especially for small business owners, I think sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming to get all of the details. And so, as you know, if you listen to this podcast for any amount of time, one of the things that I really think should be the law in California is that an employer should get an opportunity to correct upon notice before penalties or a lawsuit can be initiated. Now, repeat offenders don't count here. I'm talking about, you know, an employer who doesn't get it right because they don't know and they're given a warning and they make it right. I think that opportunity should be allowed, especially for small businesses who are just getting up and started.
I agree. I would love to see that for more laws along the lines, but unfortunately, the legislature doesn't ask our opinion when they go to make those laws. But I would love to see more of safe harbor provisions and a way for employers to especially small employers, to correct. Absolutely. So, anything else we should know about California?
There's tons, but there's no way we can go into it here. But always check your state, the laws in your state that are required. California, make sure you know about Labor Code Section 226.
And if you're using a payroll company to do this, make sure they're up on all of the most current laws, and I would question that, and what kind of protection do you have if the payroll company doesn't give a paid stub that's compliant? So
Yep.
Well, anyway, just a riveting, fun discussion, but yet again, always fun to talk through. But so these are some of those small details that small employers just don't know, and that's why we're here. So thanks for joining us on Bees on the Law. Catch you next time.
Thank you for joining us on today's podcast of Bees on the Law. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast. We also welcome any comments. If you'd like to get in touch with us or suggest a future topic, you can email us at beesonthelaw@gmail.com. And because we're lawyers, we need to remind you that this podcast is not meant to provide you with legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.